Yeah, what we need to do is from the perspective of human beings that want to understand themselves and the world. Yeah. We're trying to understand the soul. Now, like we keep on going through this, that there's what it means to be a soul, which is to be the form or actuality of a living body. That's what all it means. Very important to remember this, right? That's what it means. Yeah? In other words, but this is important to distinguish
So
this.
the actuality of a being that will live.
Of a body that can
Living
live. That's
body.
the way he says it. But of a, yeah. In other words, we remember this thing where this is in between magic and not magic. No, in between being materialist, and we have to understand exactly what it means to be materialist, and being sort of idealist or sort of dualist, right? Because very much not any of these things. Like he says, the soul is neither separate from the body nor identical to it. Right? That was one of his languages in chapter 2, I think, or 3, one of those chapters. Neither has like its own existence, nor is it just reduced to the body or even like the harmony of the parts of the body or different proposals that people had. But it's another thing which we call the form. Like this is why we need his like concept of a form, or we call the organization of a body or the logos of a body or of the life, right? In other words, soul is what it means to be alive. That's what soul is. And that's what explains, that also has like causal power. It's not just something that we're saying. It's actually what explains what life is and what gives life to the body. That's the activity of being alive. That's more or less the general definition, right, which we talked enough about. But the thing with that is that we need to really know what that means. And we don't know what that means. That's what he said in the several times. We don't really know what we're talking about until we could speak about it in detail. Until we can speak about it about a specific kind of life, right? For one reason, because life is said in many ways. Life doesn't mean just one thing. Life, right? We have at least 3 things that we call life, maybe even more, but he decided that there's 3 things. The main way we could see this is this sort of, at least the way he divides the world, there's 3 kinds of things that we call alive, known as plants, animals, and thinking things. Mostly humans, but maybe there are other ones. And these are all called, in other words, when we say it's alive, what it means to be alive is one of those 3 things, right? And they're separate things, and we have the whole discussion in chapter 3, what kind of the relationship is there between them. Are there just like 3 separate souls which have nothing to do with each other, and he ends up with this definition of it being in a geometrical series, whatever that's supposed to mean. We discussed that a little bit. There's a whole machlekes apaskim what it actually means, but he doesn't want it to be entirely different. There's some connection between them. And this is one of the reasons why he gets to start at the bottom, right? We get to start at the bottom, which is to say that whenever we say something is alive, in some sense we mean that it has nutrition. Because all the things, again, all the mortal things we keep on, but all the things that we call alive, at least have that, right? That's the minimal definition for life. We actually remember in chapter 1, he already used this. It's interesting. He already used this to give the basic definition of life. When he did his division of all kind of things, accidents and substance and matter and form and all of that. And then he said, well, soul is distinguished from other things by having life, which is having growth and nourishment. That's exactly something like that what he said. And therefore we need to, right? He said right away, right in the beginning, he said something like that. Self-nourishment, growth, and decay, which is what we speak about as life, which is really only the first kind of life. But it's like the first. So again, it's the first. The important thing over there is that it's the first place where you see there's something different between nature and this, right? There is nature. Nature doesn't grow and nourish and decay, right? It just does things that it has a kind of form, which is nature. Nature is the form that objects have, that what we call domem in Hebrew philosophy. Hebrew Aristotelian philosophy, we have this concept of a domem. I don't know where they got this word from. Probably it must be in Aristotle or it's some translation somewhere, right? Domem tzameh chai medaber. So the domem or the silent or I don't know what it actually is translating. I never looked into this. But the point is, those are what we call natural things.
No.
Yeah, still or silent, but it's not like a very weird definition for what it means is nature. Okay, things that have only natures, right? There are even worse things which are artificial, but we're talking about not real things. And then the thing that this thing, then that's not alive. Those are dead things, right? Well, even dead is probably wrong. We're not even dead, right? They're neither dead nor alive. They're just things. It's really weird to say that rock is dead. It's not dead. It's just a rock. It can't be dead if you can't be alive. Yeah, and now the line between dead and alive is nutrition, or what he calls growth and nourishment, and so that's the first reason why it's the first thing to talk about, because it's actually it's like the dividing line between living and dead things. Although you could come and say, well, what about a separate intellect or an angel, which is alive without nutrition? Okay, it's somehow better than nutrition. That's a good question, but at least the things of this world are like this, and he always. It's not only that, but his metaphysics are always sort of take the living things, the living biological things, as like archetypes for understanding everything, which is the kind of thing we are, so it makes sense. Yeah, so that's why we start here. That's one reason, right? One reason we start here is he calls it the line between living things and non-living things, which sort of means that this is the most... it's important to understand what this means, right? It's important to understand what this means in order to understand what life is, in other words, what soul is, right? We should think about this. Like, we should think about this. We go around, and like, people could have said other things, right? We could have said things that move themselves. Nature also somehow has moved itself. It's the kind of move itself, you could say. It's a kind of move itself. But it's a specific kind which is sort of what we call grows and decays and nourishes itself. That's sort of the things that we call alive. And this is what cuts it off from the things that we don't call alive. Which is why plants are alive and rocks are not, right? Although they don't move themselves in space, but they move themselves, right? This is really his like big thing. Like, you could say it's movement, or you could say it's perception, but plants don't have perception. We discussed that. And they don't even move in space, but they do move in the sense of nourish themselves and grow and decay. So they have this kind of process, this kind of life story, so to speak. I think it's a nice... Every plant has a life story. Like, it's first small, and it's big, and that happens through a certain process, right? There's some kind of some kind of organization where through taking in sunlight and nutrients or whatever it grows, that kind of causal collection, that's a kind of complexity or a kind of process that doesn't exist in rocks, right? Nothing happens with rocks. I mean, they might have some internal process of their own, but not in this kind of level. And this is what cuts off nature from life. So it's important to kind of look at this. Not only for like the first, like, because people I think, oh, why would I care about the nutritive, like the smallest kind of soul? Is like, we should care about like very lofty things like intellect, which is true. But also, this is where we can like see it, right? That's like the border. You got to go to the border to see the difference between two things. Okay, now another very important thing, and I've read someone that goes on about this today. I didn't finish the thing, but I think this is an important thing, is that this is also where we could actually see what this kind of soul that we're thinking of is, right? Because, and this is very important, because like, remember again, this is one of Aristotle's criticisms of people before him, everyone before him, which is that they don't, is it too hot here? That they don't actually understand what life is. Like, their definitions of soul are thinking too much only about human souls. And they don't really explain plants or barely even animals. Like, for example, anyone that says that... All the previous scientists, including philosophers, scientists, all kind of people, it's true, more or less, none of them, like, or even if they do, they seem to only care about the human. So like someone that says soul is ear, right, for example. Someone says, what's the soul? Soul is kind of breath, right? Breath is something that humans and animals do. It's not something that plants do, right? So your theory of soul, it just didn't take into account the most basic kind of life. And if you think about it, humans and animals also have this kind of life that plants have. They have more things, but that's really what makes them alive. We don't actually say they're alive because of their breath, right? So there's a mistake here. He's like broadening, exactly. This broadening of the object of inquiry is like trying to show us what really life is, right? And this is like one of the big things that he claims everyone else is missing. Like, you're all thinking of human lives, and then some people say, well, to have a soul is to have perception or to have intellect, which is all wrong, which is true. of animals and humans again, but it's not true of plants. And it seems that plants do something very similar to, in the basic sense, in the most basic sense of what it means to be alive.
So he ends up thinking of a living, of a person as a thinking, living thing instead of just as
Of a thinking, living, neutralizing thing.
Right. I'm
right?
saying but he thinks of it as
Thinking, perceiving.
The thinking is as living in the same way that, not in the same way.
Yeah, it's a kind of living, but it's not the only kind of living, and it's not really, in some sense, yeah. How these two definitions come together is again a problem. Like, how do these three how do you call them, like stages, or these three levels of human, how do they live together? Ends up being some kind of a problem, which we have to understand. But it's for sure that in some sense, in some more primary sense, humans. In other words, when does the human dead?
When he stops taking in nutrition.
Yeah, something like that. Although I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what he would say. Yeah. You're alive when you. Well, there's a whole discussion. There's actually a whole discussion about embryos and stuff. So today, like according to Aristotle, embryos are just plants, and we have to worry if that's whatever, not relevant to the ethical discussions. But like humans are in some sense alive when they're an embryo, and all they do is grow. They don't feel, well, that's according to him. It's not really true.
It's a plant that's potentially an animal.
Yeah, okay, there's complicated. It's more complicated. I'm saying there is, or we discussed this, right? That sometimes at death, in some sense, you could say, well, this is actually true. But there's not really Aristotle, but it's sort of like people stop thinking first, and then they stop feeling, and then they stop growing. Right? Like there seems to be some kind of truth to that. The problem is that growing in the literal sense, you probably don't even stop even after you're dead. But he would probably say growing as a human, you stop the moment whatever we call dead.
Living growth.
Well, you stop growing. The body still has some kind of like inertial thing going on, some kind of form of the body, but not form of the human. Yeah, something like that. This is the whole discussion in later people, but. Yeah, you stop growing. You stop eating, right? You stop eating or processing food when you're dead. I think that's true.
And
your stomach doesn't work.
Nutrition towards
exactly. You don't neutralize. That's really what makes you dead. It's interesting because you end up with a very interesting like
so
we have
now
I'm thinking about this.
Right?
Nutrition means growing through eating food or taking in nutrition. Mm-hmm. These three things, like growing through, and the through is the soul, really, the like connector. Yeah, turns out to be something interesting, which is people like go on saying, well, is it your brain that makes you dead? Is it your heart? Is it your breathing? No, it's your growing. Okay. Never heard of that. Never heard anyone propose this definition. Seems like what Aristotle would want us to think, maybe, according to this. Anyways, the important thing what I'm trying to get to now today is
well, the nutrition faculty is impacted when the thinking.
Beside it, because humans need their brain to neutralize also. I understand all of that. We discussed that. But in the most basic sense, what it means to be dead is to not grow, to not neutralize this whole process. Well, it also might mean to not reproduce all of these things. That's why someone doesn't have children. It's chashuv gemes, according to Chazal. It's very Aristotelian thought. Chazal have this thought where life is activity, and people that don't really act in the world, like if you're poor, if you're outside of society, right? It's interesting. There's these three people that are considered chashuv gemes, which is poor, Anima, and what was the third thing I just mentioned?
No? Is the blind person also chashuv gemes?
No. I just said it, no?
That lives outside the community?
Yeah, that was a mitzvah.
And can't reproduce.
Yeah, if you don't have children. I think. Anyways, Al Nasi Kamais Asher something. It says a pusik. I don't know. Tzayir that is Kamais. You want to look it up? Anyways, these are thoughts that are actually. I'm just saying this because someone. I'm getting off topic. Anyways. Shlosh Chashivim Kamais. It says Arba Chashivim Kamais actually in the Durim. It says in the Durim Daf Samach Dal Arba Chashivim Kamais. Kal Adam She'en Lebanim Chashivim Kamais. Oni Metzayir Sima Mish She'en Lebanim. Yeah, you remembered correctly. Yeah, I don't know what to do with the Sima thing. Well, that's a perception thing.
Perception probably, right?
So, sort of, someone doesn't have children, doesn't have a nutritive soul, basically, because it's for reproduction. Or someone that's a Metzayir doesn't have, well, it's like a social problem. It means you're out of the human society, which is kind of socially dead. Someone who can't see is, like, doesn't have perception soul. Someone who's poor, I don't know. Anyways, I mean, but again, and doesn't really match to one of these levels. That's more also like a social thing, or like you can't act. So life has to do with being able to act, not with just with having some breath or some kind of thing. It's something that goes on, some activity. Of course, it's only in chashav kemas that you can't actually kill the guy, But yeah, what am I saying is, so, but in the most basic sense, life is this thing, which is also why this is interesting. We also call humans alive in this way. I told you, it will be even a little funny when we say angels are alive in the same way that humans are alive. Because humans at least are also nutritive. Well, when they're dead, maybe their soul, their immortal soul, after they're dead, doesn't neutralize anymore, and then we get into a different kind of part. But this is important. Like, to be alive is to eat and grow through it. And actually, one more thing. So he also thinks of this other thing, which is reproduction, right? We also need to see this as sort of as the most basic story of a living thing. The most basic story of a living thing is a thing that self-reproduces, right? That self-replicates. And also like the sort of the modern science definition of life in some ways. Self-replicate. There's different ways of self-replication, but all living things self-replicate. Sort of, yeah. Depending on where you draw the line on living things. It self-replicates, and that's like the thing that living things do. That's what it means for them to be alive. These are these two things that might not be the same thing. So that's a problem that nobody really knows the exact solution to. We did certain solution last week. Anyways, what I want to get at is that turns out that understanding these things is going to teach us what it means that the soul is the thing that is alive. Because again, it seems most people, because of their focus on they're too constricted, too much symptom focus on what a soul is, which is like on some, let's say most people nowadays would focus on emotional life for some weird reason, or on self-consciousness, which is not for a less weird reason, or on other kinds of things. The problem is that doesn't teach you what life is. And we're not, right? This is why some people think that Aristotle is the solution to like the modern disembodiment and things like that, where you're like disconnected from your body. And the way to reconnect with your body is not to do yoga, it's to read Aristotle. Because Aristotle teaches that your soul is the life of your body. In other words, he's telling you, don't explain me the soul. Of course, there's very important intellectual life and all of that. But don't explain me life by reference only to intellectual life or to perceptive life or to emotional life. All these things are nice. But that's not basically what life is. You skip missing the whole thing. You're leaving out all the plants. Very sad. You don't know what happened with all the plants. And now, one of the things that happens when people, this is important, one of the things that people seem to think when they constrict their question, their life, they focus it very tightly on this human or kind of human parts, is that they say, digestion, just eating, just reproduction, those are material things. That's what most people think. Even Plato seems to say that. I saw this person was quoting, in the Timaeus, Plato, which is not, I don't know if Plato really thinks that, but that's what he's claiming, that he gives, because actually what we're learning now is also a quote from Plato. But at least in one place, when he's giving his physical theories, Plato gives a whole theory of eating, which we'll get to, and nutrition, which doesn't talk anything about souls or about proportions or about forms or anything like that. It just talks about, the things that you eat going into you and getting cut up and becoming blood and whatever, which is a material story.
Does the soul not necessarily, for Aristotle, the soul is the form of this, but for Plato, does the form facilitate this from outside?
Yeah, okay. Good question. But most people who have this more, I'm just saying most people that we talk to, including us. Hi, hello. Hello. So most people, because they only think of thinking or of feeling or of selfing or whatever it's called. Selfing is an activity, right? Unlike Descartes, who sees the self as a thing, selfing is an activity. Okay, but that's different. Unlike those people think that eating is a physical thing. You don't do that with your soul. You do that with your body, right? And that makes sense, and this separation makes sense if you have this picture of the soul being some kind of different kind of thing.
It's pulling the strings.
I don't know what kind of thing, and the body and the bodily life being a different kind of life, the life of the soul. And then Aristotle very much doesn't like that theory because of his famous problem, which he said, which then you didn't explain you didn't answer my question, which was what makes life work, what explains life, right? Because you just explained, you told me that like something else, but what actually explains this life? Now, and therefore, this is why Aristotle is in some way less like, if we have this like silly concept in our head of like being more or less spiritual or more or less Platonic, is actually a lot more Platonic here. Because he thinks that you can't even explain digestion without a soul. Of course, because his soul is less weird. Less Hechel, which nobody knows what they're, yeah. But because of that, the kind of soul that he has is actually needed, and he's going to argue very strictly against people who think that you can explain even nutrition without reference to a soul. So even nutrition is done by a soul. Of course, not the highest human soul or whatever, not the highest faculty of the human soul, but a soul. And of course, that dies. That soul is entirely something about the body. It dies, doesn't survive the death of the body or anything like that. But it's still the a soul. So looking at the stimmt, right? So that's why looking at this is a very good way to help us understand. Maybe even Aristotle understood this to help us understand what in the world he means, what in the world we're talking about when we talk about this soul that is just the life of the body, not like some batteries that come from somewhere else. Because I'm showing it to you in a place where you would have thought that you can explain this in the body way, in a material way, and you can't. Make sense? Okay, so that's why, according to, if you want to apply this to ethics, it turns out that according to Aristotle, actually eating is something you do with your soul. So there's kavanas achila. Unlike people that say that only according to Plato there's kavanas achila, it seems to be just the opposite. Anyways, makes sense? Maybe we'll talk about more stishtism like that later. Kavanas achila, I don't know what that means, but right. I mean I do know, but not in this context.
As a soulful activity.
Yeah, exactly. It's a soulful activity. It's literally done by this nutritive soul, right? And it literally has a correct proportion in which it should be, which is basically health, but it has a certain correct way.
Applying it to the soul, to the growth part of life.
Yeah, and not only that, the way, and that's one thing, and secondly, the way in which eating works is analogous. It's actually the exact same way in which everything else works, or at least analogous in the same basic way, because it's like this soul which uses the body in order to do it. So you could look on this, which is a simpler thing, which everyone seems to think they know what it is, and see what it means. I think that's a reason for starting here, for thinking about this. It's interesting if that works, but so I want to try to think about this. Okay, makes sense. Yeah. So now like this, I was trying to think about this, and it turns out that there's also a lot of desire for this, but I don't know how we'll discuss that. We don't know how that comes into this. We're like being scientists now. Turns out that people, most of what they do, actually all living things, most of what they do is eat and reproduce, right? Like the Mashgiach says, everything is just about that. Right? Well, that's just like physical fact, right? Oh, eating and reproducing. Sleeping is a problem. Nobody cares about sleeping for some reason. It's like Aristotle does have like some chapters about it, and not in like the most, because sleeping is basically not doing. You have to understand, like, at least the way it's understood usually. Yeah, right. There's a whole book on dreams, like a small book, on sleep, which tries to explain sleep also. But basically, until now, nobody really knows. Really, yeah. Yeah, no, on prophecy and sleep. Yeah, but nobody knows nowadays what sleep is. Anyway, sleep is, we discussed sleep sort of in the beginning when it's definitions. Sleep is not doing. So sleep is like being a little less alive, like we discussed. If life is activity, then sleep is being slightly less alive, at least some parts of you being not alive. So I don't also, do all living things sleep? It's another discussion, not clear. Many of them sleep. Plants don't seem to sleep. And plants are what are showing us what it means just barely to live, right? To be alive.
The notion of perception with sleep.
Yeah, because that shows that Aristotle actually would say something like this, that sleep is he actually says this, not only would say this, he actually says this, that when you're sleeping, you're more like a vegetable. Because it's the higher faculties that go to sleep, not the lower ones. Vegetables don't sleep, and the vegetables in the human actually, this is actually one of the reasons people sleep, to digest their food. It's actually not only that.
Is active when you sleep.
Yeah, okay, but that's dreams. But that has to do with imagination not being major, but or major enough.
You also can't fully be a vegetable if you're imagining.
No, of course. But at least in some sense, sleeping is actually the nutritive soul working without your mind. Yeah, almost without your mind bothering you. That's at least part of it, and it actually seems to work better. I mean, physically, because when you're up, your mind has all kinds of conscious things to do, and it doesn't let your stomach digest. That's true. Yeah, I mean, one of the things it is. I don't know if that's what sleep is for, but it's a thing that happens.
I mean, that's why you're not.
If you eat more, you need to sleep more.
Properly is because the mind's active.
Yeah, it's a certain what they call in the modern people call like a budget. Like there's a certain amount of energy that your system can allocate to everything, and you always pay. You're borrowing and paying back. Yeah. Anyways, so I don't know. Sleep is not doing. Okay, so that's what people do. So it seems to be important to understand that, like not only people, also people as plants, people as nutritive souls. Like I'm saying, it seems like, yeah, it's true. He also has this like thing where that's not what you should be doing because that's not special for people to do, but that's like ethics things. But it's still where your soul,
or it's not even that faculty.
The first soul is basically.
Apply itself towards also.
Okay, maybe, but it's the first thing that left. Like when we say you're alive, that's what we mean. There's nothing else we could mean. You go to the doctor, please make sure I stay alive. You don't mean I should help me stay thinking. I mean, that's a different kind of doctor. The normal doctors, yes, somewhat. Mostly we mean make my body, and you can't say this is what I'm trying to say. This is not a body, right? Don't say the doctors for the body and there's doctors for the soul. All of them are doctors for the soul. There are no doctors for the body.
The animal soul.
The only kind of person that would be a doctor for the body would be someone. And it's funny because Aristotle in his Health in the beginning said something like this, where there's like a physical doctor was interested in the only person who would be a doctor for the body would be like a material scientist who's trying to understand what kind of things it's good to make human flesh out of or something like that. Mm-hmm. That would be like the matter of the human. But the functioning of the body is actually a soul. It's not a body. So there isn't any doctors of the. Of course, the doctor doesn't care about the soul as soul. He cares about the soul as body or something like that. But he's still a doctor of the soul. There's only soul doctors according to this. It's weird. No, it's not weird, but it shows. It's showing. I'm making it weird so I could try to like focus in on this. So now, basically, what he does here is very interesting, and that's what my pshat said, that we can talk about this in our famous four causes way, which is what this whole page of my thing does. If you have it, I give you one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's what this whole thing of this does, which is say, okay, so what does it mean? And finally he gives us like a summary of what he actually means by the soul being the thing of the body, the life of the body. In this sense, right? We could apply the same thing for the higher ones. And we say, okay, so the soul is the cause and the first principle, or the principle, the archi, of the living body. Now, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to say that it's not enough to talk about the material cause, we have to talk about everything else? Right? So remember there are famous four causes, right? Only three of which are interesting here, right? Because the material cause is what it happens to, or what it's capable of happening to, which is not explaining the thing, as we'll see in a minute. So we're left with three causes. In other words, the word cause is, in this sense, in the principal way, right? In this way at least, has three meanings, which are famously the cause that is the source of movement, and the cause which is the for, and the cause of which is what it is, right?
So the cause is what happened before, right?
Not what happened before. What happened before is nothing.
Not what happened before, but what happened.
What moves it,
the event, right?
What moves it, what it is, and what it is for. Those are the three things. Those are the four causes. And the fourth cause is what it's from, or what it's made from, something like that. Mm-hmm. What's made of. Now, what it's made of doesn't explain life, for sure not. That's the body. That's for sure the body. What it's made of is the body, right?
The explain what it's made for and to.
What is it made for? Which one do you want to talk about first? what it's made of is the Empedocles theory that we discussed last week. We could start from there and see that doesn't help us, right? That's in the next page. If someone would tell you, well, the soul is just pieces of fire going up and pieces of earth going down, which is what makes plants grow up and down, right? Remember? Mm-hmm. Aristotle will tell you that's wrong for two reasons. It doesn't explain the unity or the structure of the animal, of the plant even. In other words, there's something in animal or in living thing, which is besides for going up and down in the natural way, in the way that we can talk about natural elements going up and down, which means that it's not helping us, right? Same way you can't say that growth is just fire, because fire doesn't actually grow. Fire grows and eats, sort of, has some kind of nourishment. It eats, it consumes, but it does not. It's not a soul. This is why people used to think that the fire is a soul. The soul is a fire, because they said, well, they remember. But this is like a very basic way. And people nowadays also think that this helps us, and it doesn't. Like the first thing when someone tries to explain you, okay, so what is this thing doing? Why is this eating? Why is this thing eating and growing through eating and reproducing and all these things? They say, well, because it's made out of something, right? And then I ask you, okay, and why is that something eat? And you say, because it's made out of even smaller somethings. Okay, now where does this end? At which point do I actually get my explanation of why the thing eats? So sort of you say things like this. Now the modern theories are much more complicated, but people end up saying basically Empedocles theory, like, okay, or the fire theory, which is not Empedocles, whoever it was. They say, well, okay, we've got this thing called growth, right, eating and making the thing you eat into you, something like that, right? That's what fire does. Fire seems to do that, right? Now, fire is a basic element, according to Greeks, okay? Let's assume that it is. Let's assume that fire is like just a thing. There's something called fire. If you're like religious, you say, when God created the universe, He created four things, earth, fire, word, whatever. And fire is just a thing, and it fires, but it eats. And that's where like my explanation stops. Well, God is maybe a different kind of explanation, but what I mean to say is this is like the basis of what the world is made out of. And then now you ask me, okay, so now I understand how people eat, because in people there's a soul called fire. It's a little piece of fire somehow. Well, don't ask me how exactly the person doesn't get burnt up or where exactly it works, but there's some kind of fire, and that's eating, and that's how you eat. It's somehow made out of fire, somehow, right? And Aristotle will tell you, very nice. That seems to be true to me even. I think you're right. It's the fire or the warmth, right? Fire doesn't mean actual fire. That's why the question, not a question. It means heat, right? So heat is like a basic thing somehow. Don't ask me. And heat.
It's still considered a basic thing, no?
No, it's not considered a thing nowadays. Heat is just a way of talking about molecules moving quickly or something like that. Nowadays we only believe in space and time. Okay, and even not in that. But I'm not talking about what nowadays people believe in. No, nobody believes in, which end up being space and time. Okay, not for now. Force. What is a force? You ever saw a force? Anyone ever saw one? Okay, I'm not getting into. No, that's not really what it means. When in the end of the day, philosophically, it means they only believe in space and time, which are the same thing. So don't ask me. It's the same thing. The modern theories at basis need to believe in space and time as explaining everything. These like dimensions, and force is just some kind of thing that happens in space and time. So space and time is more basic than that, right? Sort of. That's what they seem to believe. And I don't know. Some people will tell you different theories, but the kids and nobody knows.
Time from after force.
Okay, but kids and nobody knows. And point is, I'm just trying to we're not talking about which explanation is correct. We're just talking about what kind of explanation is helpful, right? The kind of explanation that says that you are doing something because you are made out of that is not, for Aristotle, it's a good explanation. It's a good explanation for why fire grows. Fire grows because fire is a thing that grows. That's fine. But fire is not a soul. What is the difference? And this like big thing is that fire just grows forever. That's his like basic thing that he says here. In other words, fire lacks structure, lacks organization, lacks limit. You call it limit, right? Fire just fires forever, and that's fine. If you put it somewhere and everything will just burn up forever, the whole world. Happens to be that humans or animals or living things don't just grow forever. There's a very major question. Actually, Aristotle even asked this in his more physical works about growth. Like, people seem to continue to eat, right? When you're a baby, you eat and you grow. At some point, you stop. Isn't that interesting? Like, there needs to be, well, nowadays maybe someone will tell you there's another rock that stops you. Okay, I don't know. But at least for the idea, Like idea is that obviously this kind of reductive explanation, which says that growing is just like what you would assume it is, something like, okay, growing is just putting more pieces into you and therefore it grows, which is not correct, because people stop growing at some point. They don't actually grow forever. They'll tell me, well, maybe if you're obese, you grow forever. Yeah, maybe. But that's wrong. It's not good. It's not. Your body doesn't want to be obese. So you don't actually grow forever. If you're sick, maybe, then there's something wrong with that. So that's not what the nature of the life wants. It doesn't want to grow forever. So what is this like? What stops it? Another way of saying it, why does it not grow up and down and right, left? There's different ways of saying this, but the basic idea is the same thing. That is not explaining the unity, or not explaining the organization, or not explaining the limit of what kind of growth is it, or what kind of thing is it. So therefore we need something else. We need some other principle besides for what it's made out of. That's the main thing. And that's why what it's made out of, it's true. You see, you have to remember, it's very important. Aristotle doesn't deny that things are made out of things. Unlike what people seem to be confused always. Nobody is interested in denying that, actually.
Be fully explained by the things
Exactly. It's always a part of it's always going to be a part of the explanation. Always. Has to be a part of explanation. What things made out of is a part of explanation, but it's not the full explanation, which is why the Empedocles four elements theory doesn't actually explain anything. I mean, it explains something, explains the material cause of everything, but it doesn't explain the why. What?
It doesn't give you a logos of it, a full.
Exactly. It doesn't explain you why it happens that way, the way it does. At least not for anything more complicated than the simple elements, which even themselves have a nature, which so it doesn't really explain them either, but that's another level. In Kitzur, so we've got the other things, right? And now we have these like three ways of talking about it, or three actually not three ways of talking about, three different causes, or three other things, which are our other three famous important causes, right? Which, in our case, are the same thing. And that's the important thing of a soul, or actually in some way every natural thing, but definitely a living thing. A living thing is a kind of thing which explains itself. That's the job of, that's how you become alive, by explaining yourself. by what you are, explaining what you're for and what moves you, and what did I say? And what you are, what you're for, and what moves you. Those are all the same thing, a living thing, in other words, the soul. We could like speak of it in these three languages, or in these three aspects of it, but it's the same thing. Unlike, for example, an artificial thing, which definitely doesn't move itself, for example. So it's not a natural thing. So what moves it is someone else, someone outside of it, right? This is true for all natural things. Unlike some other things, which even they are natural things, don't have the kind of movement that souls have, which is life, or that don't do their goal, don't do their therefore. We'll see that in a minute.
Carry themselves through that organizational process.
Yeah, they don't. They need something else, and they're not for themselves. I'll have to explain this in a second.
But it's a part of something.
So, no, I'm giving it a second.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a second. Also, the soul is only halfway like this. We'll see. In other words, in one sense, it's like that. And he goes through in this order, and we'll go back to here, right? He says, it's obviously the form of things, right? The essence of things, the what it is to be a thing. Why is that? That's simple. That's almost like a definition, because what it is for a living thing to be alive, is to be alive, right? In other words, to be as a living thing. If you would not be alive, you wouldn't be what you are, what the thing is. So when I ask you what, you're not just, right? Well, we need to know what it means to be alive. In other words, nourishment, right? For example. Nourishment is the nutritive soul. That's just the definition of it. That's just the account of it. That's what we call the form as essence, or the essential cause, or the substance, whatever it is. Okay, so that's the same thing. Or we could call it the actuality, right? What it is actually, not only what it is potentially, which is again the matter. Okay. Now another thing which is important is that it's for something. That's the for. Motion is actually a simple thing, right? But that's the last thing. But the motion is actually the thing that we're going to talk about, because nourishment is a kind of motion.
Right? I'm saying.
It's also what it's for has two kinds. There's two kinds of what it's for. One is when you're for something but you're not that thing. In other words, you're not the thing that you're for is not moving you. You're moving yourself towards it. So, for example, in the way, that's the second thing that he says. And he says it afterwards. Where does he say that? We did this, right? How the four... It's not here? I lost it. Oh, he started in it.
Well,
He said it before.
The three causes of the living body?
No, he said it first. The thing is, like we discussed before, the easiest way actually to explain the essence of things and what they're for is to explain what they're for, really. And that's why we say, what is nourishment and reproduction for? They're both for the body living, living by the life going on to be alive. And that's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it, in other words, another kind of for, is that they're for eternity or for immortality or for the divine. Remember that? These are two kinds of fours. He said there's two kinds of fours.
Aristotle doesn't need something to be moved in order to move. Like, it's not Newtonian like that, right?
No, of course not. The thing that not, but there's, that's what I'm saying. There's two. The actual end. In other words, the when you say why, what are souls? Soul is the why. Soul is the why. Now the why is the like, and this is like a quote from the how do you call it, from the symposium actually, which says that the reason about love, right, that love is really for things being like God. And being like God meaning existing forever, never stopping to exist. And since mortal things can't exist forever, they exist forever in the way which they could, which in Aristotle's language is exist in species, not in number, right? It's going to be a different one of you which will exist, but it will be one of you in some way. Actually, in some sense, even us existing throughout time is not not this important. Yeah, even the soul, same one, even the same soul, even the same life, the same person existing throughout time is not the same one existing all the time, because it's to me this time and me that time. In other words, it lives in throughout this whole change and it keeps on changing. So it's something else tomorrow, but it's just, that's why it's only similar to divine. It's not divine. The divine things don't change throughout time either. They're not in time. So it turns out that it's actually, this is interesting. It turns out that eating and reproducing is very similar. They at least have the same end, which is me continuing to exist as long as I could. And you say, what do you mean? Me eating is for myself and reproducing is for someone else? No, that's not true. Eating is also not for yourself, because you don't really have a stable self in the correct way, anyways. Both of them are so like a b'diavad. Both eating is for me existing tomorrow, right? And reproducing is for me existing tomorrow, and a slightly more, and a slightly further away from like what I know as myself today, but not much further. Like relative to the actual, the eternal and divine things, it's not a very big difference. That's an interesting thought. So that's the four of the soul. You realize? That's the four. That's what souls are for. There, in other words, the nutritive soul. Like, and this is how it shows you. Like, then there's a process to do that. That's why the process is what we call the moving cause, or how do I keep myself alive by eating. So that's like the movement. Or the cause of it, right? What we would usually recognize as a cause is the moving cause, right? That's what makes the most sense to humans in 2024. Actually, I don't know. In the 18th century, it makes the most sense, right? Or you say, well, your cause is that the reason you're still alive is because you ate, right? Or the reason you have children is because you reproduced. But that's only half of the reason. Because why do you have children? And why are you alive? So that's not actually the soul, that's only like part of this, or the soul as a moving cause. And actually the thing that moved you, now you realize who's the guy that moved you, or in some sense the thing that moved you, the reason you moved, is
Also
because
you,
it's
but-
more, yeah, there's you. You is a bad word, but the soul
So,
is
yeah.
is because it's moving towards eternity. Now this is why you realize that there's something weird here. That's why he gets into these two meanings of the word for. Because eternity is not me. Definitely not me. God is definitely not me.
Maybe there's the internal for and then the external.
Exactly. Internal for is the fact that the soul is what organizes my activities towards living forever. Or being forever. Being as long as I can. Same thing. Towards the goal which is not it. So that's why this is actually where you see something that moves something without being moved.
The soul.
Also the soul, but in both of these senses. But
also
the thing that
whole
you're moving
project
towards,
eternity.
right? It's like we call it like a desire, right? But the thing that's desired doesn't care. Not like it's not a personal thing. You're all trying to be, because that's the nature of what you are, and the thing that this side of it, the lower side of it, so to speak, that's what we call the soul, really properly. Eternity is not your soul. God is not your soul, although He's your for. Right? That's why I have to remember this. At least according to ours. Maybe some people will say God is your soul, but he doesn't think God is your soul. God is not your soul. The forever is not your soul. Your soul is trying to live forever, so it's like tending towards foreverness,
Points towards it. Yeah.
turning towards and doing things towards it. And this is why it does all the things it does. And not this is why it does, in the sense of like there being another faculty like a psychology that wants to do that. That's just what it is. And that's what it is to be a soul, and that's what it is the moving cause also. But this cause doesn't move. The eternity doesn't move. And maybe even the soul in the sense in which it's just the final cause is not moving. But that's another discussion. Maybe just mind, which doesn't have to move. But he's not talking about that right now, at least not clearly enough. But at least you understand that how this like final cause, the for is both for myself and for something else. In other words, it's for something else, because it's for living forever, but it's not the living forever that is doing it. So it's like two different ways in which you could cause something to go toward a goal. Like there's like the pull way and the push way, or the pull side and the push side. The forever is only pulling, unless you're like a Jew who believes that God commanded you. Anyways, but then there's a pushing from that also somehow. Don't ask me if that's supposed to be literal. Right. We discussed this, like there's a mitzvah, right? This is, according to this Plato, Aristotle, pshat of love and reproduction. That's why there's I mean, this is also in the Talmud, like there's this very traditional Jewish thought that having children is being like God. And it's like it's the thing, the only thing. Like, weirdly, Chazal decided that the Pasuk in Parshas Bereshis is a mitzvah, not only like a mamer, it's one of the Asirim Amaris, or the 11th, depending on how you count. But they decided that Pri is a mitzvah, like something you should do. But that's not really true. And I think it's obviously, even they understand that. They just formulate it as a mitzvah because you have to do certain actions and you have choice, so whatever, get married or whatever the action is. But really, what it's just saying is that the nature of humans, of all animals, right? Maybe of plants also. So again, the Ramban discusses this. Plants are not. The Parshas Bereshis doesn't believe like Aristotle that plants have a soul, because the word nefesh is only for animals and humans. But the Ramban is worried about this, and he says, well, this is a kasha, what can we do? Maybe Aristotle was wrong, who knows? Anyways, but it's true, not entirely true, because the Torah does discuss, Parshas Bereshis does discuss reproduction of plants, right? Whatever, something like that, which says that there is not, but this is talking about nature, right? I think this is pshat. The nature of a tree, it's in the nature of a tree to make more trees. That's part of what being a tree is. Maybe that's mainly what being a tree is, because it's sustaining itself to sustain itself, not only in itself, in eternity, as far as eternity goes. And that's why when it comes to people and it becomes like a tzivui, like telling you to have children, to be children, really what this means is you're created, there's God here, and God exists. And you can even say maybe you're created by God, I don't know. And everything wants to be God, so that's telling you to have children.
So
To have children.
Even this idea of created by God could be understood as...
Yeah, of course, but there's a reason.
the
No,
other
I'm
direction.
saying the idea of mitzvah, the idea of at least this mitzvah, which is like the first mitzvah, which is like a paradigmatic mitzvah, you can make these titles. And it's sort of like not really a mitzvah that's not really a mitzvah, so it shows us what mitzvahs are supposed to be. Because the pshat is not a mitzvah. Only since we sinned and we're confused and we don't want to have children, so we need to be told That's just like to get us out of our mess. But really, it's not like it's. And it's also true. I mean, people want to have children without the mitzvah. It's like only if they're real briska dayin. You only want to have children because it's a mitzvah. But normal people want to have children, and it's also a mitzvah. So it's like, great, such a good God. He made us a simple human need into a mitzvah. Like, how do you say? Even gets char for it. Like we're doing the most basic human thing. Like everyone does it, but we're doing it a mitzvah. But it's not really true. I think really it's the same. That is the mitzvah. That's what it means, and that's what means lishma. That's what means doing towards God. So lishma again, and these two parts, right? God didn't have to. That's why the Torah like has this like way of speaking as if God did it, like he told them, but it's not really told them. It's just by him being that he's telling them. This is the Rambam basic, right? God doesn't say anything, doesn't act. He's act not in this way. It doesn't change, right? He acts by being what he is, and everything wanting to be what it is, and that's how everything tries to be. That's why everything is trying to be. And yeah, how did I get into this whole thing? Anyways, that was my Torah Parshas Bereshit. That's why Chacham say that if you don't have children, you're a matas admus, you're make less God exist in the world because the person is telling him whatever. But point is, yeah, this is like the thing of being like God. And being like God just means being, because the main thing about God is that He is, not the main thing, the only thing.
I think being tends to eternity by
being is just same thing. To be is just God is just is really, because he doesn't persist through time. He just is eternal, not right, exactly. And things that are in time, which God created because He wanted to remember the time is, whatever. But they tried to persist as much as they could, which is by eating and having children. Because eating is the only way in which he doesn't have this here, which is like why we need to eat. He's missing that, right? Which is really something that he needs to fill in somehow. Right? Like it seems like if we want to continue to exist, we should just continue to exist. Why do we need to eat? We really need to eat because otherwise it would stop to exist. So there's some like deficiency here which makes living things not stable enough without eating. He doesn't really have that right here. Some other people would realize this. So maybe he realizes another. In other words, a God or angels or whatever, eternal things just don't eat in any sense, right? We need to eat. We're saying we want to be forever, therefore we need to eat, or therefore we need to reproduce.
Why are there kinds of things that whose eternity involves eating?
Yeah, in other words, I'm saying I want to show you that eating is just, if you think at least in the final cause sense, and the why, and the what it's for, eating is just for existing. In other words, eating is for being like God, right? Like everything else. Now, the problem is that God doesn't need to eat in order to exist, and we do need to. So you're really missing the main explanation, which is what makes me different from God, which is why I need to eat in order to persist.
Why is this a problem?
I don't say it's a problem. I just say it doesn't talk. This chapter, this story is missing that thing. Because I want to know why I'm eating, and you say I am eating in order to be like God. Yeah, that's true in the most general sticks, but that's only halfway it's true because that's very nice. But why do I exist in this bad way in which I need to eat in order to exist? Why does my body? There's an answer for this. There must be a physical answer to this, which is like your body keeps on losing fluids, and therefore if you don't replenish them, you die. There's something like degenerative about the living bodies, where they have to continually eat, right? There's something wrong with them. Their matter isn't. There's an explanation for this in the more physical works. That seems to be the real reason why, like the physical reason why we need to eat, right? We're being very general and very like abstract, very like metaphysical here, but that's not. I'm explaining though. I'm missing something here, which is why eating is not such a godly thing. Because the really reason we need to eat is because we can't be God. So you have like there's two ways of. I'm making everything very nice. Like people like play, and we love. We have love just because we want to be like God and have children and be forever, and we just eat because we want to be like God and at least exist for a few days, and that makes eating sound like a very godly thing, but it's really the opposite in some way because that it's reminding you that you're mortal. Right? We eat because we're mortal, or even not only mortal. Like mortal sounds nice, like you die after you're 90 years old. No, mortal in the sense that you'll die tomorrow if you don't eat. Next week, whatever. You're very mortal, extremely limited. Your body has like enough life in it for a week or whatever it is, as long as a person can live without food or water. We have very little life in us, like if you think of it that way. I don't know why I'm talking about like this. Anyways, just because it makes sense to me like this. Makes sense. Mm-hmm. But this is the four. I'm just trying to say the two fours. Like the real four is the for eternity, like the thing it's towards, and that thing doesn't move you. It's what you move towards. And the thing that's moving you is, again, the soul, which is moving you towards that. right? So you could say I eat for myself, or you could say I eat for God. They're the same thing. But in one sense, we're talking about what the
one
for.
is for you to live,
what
and
the
one's what you're living for, or whatever. I don't know if that's the best way of putting it.
No, one is what is living by living for that, and the other one is what it's living for in the other sense. The Aristotle, this is the translation here. Is here the sake for is twofold: the purpose for which and the beneficiary for whom. He had a better translation. This guy he said there's two kinds of for. One is the for what, and one is the by what. So I'm living for God by my soul, which has the soul is this kind of thing which can be for, which has a for, which is the for, but it's my own for. It's not
by which you live.
It's not for itself, right? This was the by which.
What?
Probably, yeah, the by which and the for which. It sound like two witches which should be burned, but yeah. So that's what we live for, and that's what eating is for, and that this is again in the that's why reproduction and eating are the same faculty. They're the same thing, and this is also like why there's another connection where like you need to eat in order to reproduce, and reproducing and eating is very similar in the physical sense also, right? Because eating is just me taking in some nutrients somehow and it becoming part of me. And
expelling the nutrients.
Yeah, reproducing is just that somehow getting that part of me into another person and continuing that growth.
The deficiency of needing to reproduce to have some kind of eternal standing or somehow related.
They're the same thing. They're the same exact thing.
So it's the same flaw or the same.
No, they're the same. They're definitely the same goal. I need to persist. I want to persist tomorrow and next year and after I die.
But they both require.
And they both require eating. By the way, they both require eating. Just to be clear, they both require eating, right? In other words, I don't have it in myself to persist. So I need to eat and make that into me tomorrow, and also need to eat and make that into my son.
And also, right.
Making my son is also actually my food. We don't think about it that way, but like not my food. It's my post-digested food, which then with a bunch of other whatever the whole process of embryology and everything is. But it's my food which grew, right? We use it like. Is growing in the woman and it grows up and humans are just growing. You grow children. Like we talk about it as plants grow children. People give birth to children. It's very different. It's not really different. It's the same kind of process, just with a lot of complications and who knows what else because it's a complicated thing. But it's the same thing, right? I think that's important. We think of reproduction as something like weird, like special. It's not very special. It's just more growth, putting seeds into the ground and having them grow. I mean, that's the basic process, right? That's not even so different. We even call them seeds. I don't know which seed was first. The seed of in Parshas Bereshis, the seed of the plants were first. Doesn't say the word seed. Does it say the word seed by people? I don't remember. It says fruit. It's a botanical expression. Yeah. So yeah.
Title for the class is.
Yeah. So.
Kid is 3 years ago's John.
Well, it basically is if you think about it. I mean, if you eat the wrong foods, then you drink alcohol or whatever, then your kid grows up with brain damage or whatever. I mean, those are things that happen. More from the mother or the father, but it's still true that your child is just you, and yeah. And that's why he says you can persist in species and not individually. Well, in order to have children? Pretty
No, but that the child itself.
You didn't realize that eating, like which mitzvah is it to eat? Eating is a mitzvah? Sounds like a dvarish law. Peri is a mitzvah, right? And having sex is a mitzvah, applies for it. But eating, I mean, if you don't exist, you can't have children. Obviously, it's a mitzvah, no? Pekuach nefesh, I don't know. Like, what's mitzvah is pekuach nefesh? How's it the biggest mitzvah? Like, that's the first thing. You gotta exist. I mean, before that, nothing. It's all the mitzvahs, basically. It's funny that we think of it as not just a thing. Like, this is the thing we should do less of. Well, we should do less of it because we do too much of it. So that's just, because it's wrong. But it's not like it's basically that's what I was keeping on thinking. Like all these, yeah. I'm going to talk about it 1 second. I have to finish. And then there's we spoke about the what it is, which is almost the same thing as what for it is, and the for it is. And then also the motion, right? Because the soul is what moves you both in space, right? Things that move in like animals, like some animals at least, which have feet and can move, or something equivalent to feet. That the soul is what moves them. Actually, we have to have a complicated theory of that also. And same thing, perception, which is a kind of movement, or allowing yourself to be moved by something, which is again happens because you have a soul, which is that kind of capacity. And the same thing, growth, which is again a kind of movement, which is the most basic movement which exists in all things. I'm not going to get to this whole thing about food being contrary or no, next time. I thought I would get it today. Yeah, so I wanted to tell you a different story, because of nonsense. So the Arizal had a question, and I was looking about it. Let's see if he ever answered me. No, nobody told me. The Arizal said that a quote in his book on here in the Kitatayr in Bashas Ekev in Vachalta V'Savata V'Rachta, said that some philosopher, he said that, I'm not sure which philosopher, said that it can't be that people have an immortal soul because when you stop eating, you die. Mashu kazeh. Is that a good question?
Can't be have a mortal soul?
Immortal. A soul that doesn't die, because your soul is just, so like there's a bunch of assumptions here that he doesn't, and the result seems to misunderstand it extremely, and he says that the question is sort of like, if the soul is something spiritual or something godly, then what's it got to do with food, which is not spiritual? I don't know who told him that. I mean, actually his answer is that, who told you that? But food is like, and this is like, it's quoted in Magen Avraham and Siman Vav, this Shtek Larizal, because it's the Ramah of Mafli Lasais, and the Ramah says that what's the wonder of nutrition, right? Of the digestive system, or the soul, or whatever it is, that there's the spiritual thing, when this physical thing and material thing and immaterial thing would somehow work together. So that's only God can do that. That's what the Ramah says on the Mafli Lasais, his own pshat. And the Magen Avraham quotes this Harizal, which sort of asks this question, like, so how does eating sustain the soul? Which is not the question, but really, the Harizal seems, that's one like way of saying that question. And then the answer is, and which the Magen Avraham quotes, is that food is, who told you that food is not spiritual? Food is also spiritual. You don't know the Torah of Motzei Pi Hashem? He said, you don't live on food, live on God. So what does the food got to do with it? So God is in the food also. So when you're eating, you're just getting some more God. That's the Arizal theory. I mean, I'm saying in a very brutal and vulgar way, but Nitzotzes or whatever, and that's how you live. That's what it says in the Kisvei Arizal, and it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch, so you're allowed to know it. It says in Magen Avraham. Anyways, even if you're not 40 and you didn't learn philosophy. But Arizal actually quotes it a little bit more complicated than this, and like quotes some philosopher that said that this proves that there's no immortal soul. And it's a very weird proof. I don't know who this philosopher ever was. I asked my friend. He said maybe Luceritis or something. Who was a physical Epicurean, atomist, and he has this like long poem about it was known. It was printed in the Arizal's times probably. So maybe it might have been I heard something like that. Basically, if you're an atomist, it's not a theory. Like it's not a kasha. I don't know what kind of kasha this is. Like what do you mean the soul gets nourished by food? No, it's the body that gets nourished by food. Now, what's the soul got to do with it? I don't know. Well, you see that this leads us to the Aristotelian conundrum, which is like, if you have a separate soul, it doesn't explain this life. And if you explain this life, you can explain it without a soul. Just like, I can explain life. You eat, and you grow. Thank you very much. Where's the soul got to do with it, right? And that obviously dies. You stop to eat, you die. That's basically the thought that Arizal is going. And the Arizal answer is sort of Aristotelian, if you think about it. He like says, no, you need a soul to eat. Your soul is eating the soul of the food, or the potential of the food to be a human form. Or in his sense, the godliness in it, whatever. But the same idea, I think there's a very similar, I think that Arizal is just being a good Aristotelian, and his kasha, he's just very confused in the way he formulates it. But I think what is, in some sense, at least what he's saying, is just that we can't actually, what I said in the beginning, we can't actually explain eating without a soul either. And you actually even have to explain food as being, which is the next part, as being having something to do with the soul, or something to do with human form, which is what makes it food for humans. Anyways, if you find out better what's going on over there, you let me know. That's all. Okay. I guess. We could finish.